Hey guys, welcome to the Stand Up Review podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're reviewing Nikki Glaser's 2019 special Bangin. Let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you want to help support the podcast, then head on over to patreon.com/standupreview. With tiers starting at as little as £1, there are some great benefits, such as voting for which specials you want reviewed, Q&As, bloopers, early access to podcasts, exclusive podcasts, and many more. Sign up at patreon.com/standupreview, and thank you for your support. As a special limited time offer, anyone who becomes a patron during the month of July, regardless of which tier, can choose one stand-up special that will be reviewed on the podcast, as well as receiving the standard benefits for the tier you choose. This offer runs out on the 31st of July, so head on over to patreon.com/standupreview for this one-time deal. Starting off as usual with a little bit of background, Nikki Glaser has done various TV, radio and comedy work, but this is her first stand-up special. I had heard of her, but not seen anything she had done before watching this, although I had been intending to watch it. In terms of a comedic style, she uses observational comedy and a kind of storytelling, but it's not really a story, it's kind of just background information that she uses to build up bits. But with that out of the way, let's get into the show itself. At the opening of the show, Nikki jumps straight into it. She starts off talking about blowjobs, and at the start, there are not that many jokes. The premise that she's talking about is kind of funny, but there are periods where you're not laughing. But the bit builds and it gets better as it goes along, and when the jokes do come, they're very good. This bit is very well written, so that the jokes are quite well spaced out after the initial setup, but they're not needed particularly often, and the general flow of the bit keeps your attention really well. She then goes on to talk about being ugly. She kind of talks through her childhood a bit. And again, there's not a lot of jokes, but they're well spaced out and they're very funny when she does tell them. And it becomes clear very early on that she's a very talented writer. She goes on to talk about masturbating, and here it's a lot more traditional. There's a lot of jokes, very quick fire, and it's still very good, even though it deviates from the initial style of the show, because her joke writing is that good, that having more jokes clumped together can only work well. And when they are spaced out in the earlier parts of the show, it just means that because of how good they are, it's easier to watch than if there were bad jokes that were spaced out, because it's actually worth the wait. In the next bit, she talks about porn, and here she goes on a little bit of a rant and takes it in a very different direction than you would expect. This is something she does a couple of times throughout the show, and she's very good at leading you down the path a little bit before switching it over. She also kind of links this into talking about sex, and this is a really good bit. It's much more traditional in the sense that she's got a funny story and there are jokes branching off it, and the story itself is really good, but the jokes and the way she incorporates the jokes into the story really make it a great bit. She then goes on to talk about guys who wear necklaces, and this is really well told bit. It builds to a really good ending, but a problem here is that she doesn't quite land the ending. It just kind of peters out into the next bit. It's a really great way to end the bit, but she seems to not quite get it right. I don't know if she just missed her timing or whatever with it, but it feels a little bit awkward. It's a really good bit anyway, and the ending is still funny, but the way she delivers it means it doesn't quite live up to what it could have been. After that, she talks about blue balls, and as I said earlier, she's very good at building up a bait and switch. And what she does particularly well is she'll use her character well to make the direction she's going in seem believable, or that she actually does believe that. And it's not even necessarily that there is a right or wrong way to talk about it, although in this specific bit there probably is. But she'll lead you into believing that that is the direction she's going. She then goes back to talking about blowjobs, and this bit probably goes on a little bit too long. It's funny throughout, but it could definitely have finished earlier than it did. It's kind of an extension of the bit where she's talking about blue balls, which probably doesn't help it. And it's one of the few bits of the show where you're still laughing at the end, but you're just kind of waiting for it to finish. Which is a little bit different to the next bit where she's talking about foreplay, in which there's a lot of build-up and there's not as many jokes as there needs to be. And it's just generally not as funny as the rest of the show, in my opinion. The few jokes are still good, but there's just not enough spread throughout this bit. There's too much background given, and you're starting to lose interest for the end of the bit. This then brings us to the ending of the show where she's talking about the clip. There's a little bit of a slow build-up here, but the ending is really good. It's kind of a weird way to end the show. She finishes with a great joke, but then pauses as if she's going to carry on before saying thanks for coming out. It just kind of means that she doesn't quite get the laugh she probably should have got because the audience is waiting for her to carry on, but it's a great ending nonetheless. So a few extra things to mention. In terms of transitions, they are pretty much seamless. I can't think of any two bits that don't follow on faultlessly from the last. It's mostly easy to separate the show into bits, although not always, but it's still done in a way where it's almost just the next chapter of the story. It makes sense to move on, and what you're moving on to makes sense to come next. It's an extremely well-written show. As far as the stage persona goes, it's quite hard to nail down. She's clearly very relaxed and confident in her comedy, but her character is someone who's a little bit unsure of themselves. It may just be Nikki being herself, but it feels like a character to me, and she does well to write the show in a way where you very quickly get used to that character, and she uses that to enhance certain jokes or certain parts of the show. It is hard to say if it's a character or a persona because of how confident she is, but then some of the jokes rely on her not being so confident, but it doesn't come across as awkward, so I think it's somewhat intentional. As for the audience, there's one slightly awkward moment at the start of the show, but after that you don't really notice the audience at all. They laugh when you do, Nikki doesn't really talk to them at any point, and they just don't affect the show positively or negatively. And now finally, some overall thoughts. This is an extremely well written show. Having never seen anything of her before this, my main takeaway was that Nikki is an incredible writer. All of the jokes are funny, and the structure of the show is one of the best I've seen. Her style is quite unusual in that she is able to give a lot of backstory with very few jokes in parts, but she doesn't lose your attention. And the jokes that she does tell are great, so any laughs are sort of big enough to carry you over till the next joke. One thing that I'm not even sure if I really want to mention, but a lot of female comics try to be a positive role model and play the feminist role, which is fine and it is needed, but when a majority of female comics are doing that, someone who is good and goes against that grain, well, not necessarily against it, but does something a bit different or doesn't try to be in that role, it's very refreshing to see. And even though I don't mind watching that kind of comedy, some of my favourite comedians do play that role. Catherine Ryan, Eliza Schlesinger. It's really nice to have a female comic who is just making jokes. And obviously it still comes from a female perspective, but it's not trying to be female comedy. Anyway, I'm not sure if I really wanted to mention that, but there you are. As for a rating, I'm finding it hard to knock too many points off this, and I'm kind of torn between a 7 and an 8, but I always give a rating straight after watching the special, and this was an 8 for me. Thanks for listening to the Stand Up Review podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe to get new episodes as soon as they come out every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Check out our Patreon for some awesome benefits at patreon.com/standupreview. If you have any thoughts or suggestions for the show, whether it be a new segment or a show you'd like us to review, let us know on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at standupreview and give us a follow while you're over there. Feel free to share this or any of our other podcasts on any social media platform. Have a great day and we'll see you for the next episode.